I've been waiting to tell you this for a long time, but I think the time is now to describe what really it means to be an activist judge. You've heard the term activist judge used by people like Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, Kristi Noem, Tricia McLaughlin, who was the old press secretary for Department of Homeland Security. They use that term to describe a judge that makes a correct decision in reining in Donald Trump's tyrannical terror. It's not activists to correctly interpret the law and call out their lawlessness. What's activist is what the Supreme Court is doing. Let me tell you different ways in which the Supreme Court of the United States has been behaving in an activist fashion. Now, justices like Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, who have been on the court for a long time, traditionally call themselves originalists or strict constructionists. They believe traditionally, or so they say, that the job of a justice, the job of a judge, is to not take into account what's going on in politics, not to legislate from the bench, not to take into account pop culture or what's going on in the news at the time, because your job is just to interpret the law as to the parties in front of you, as to the cases that's presented in front of you, and not look at the impact or effect of your decision. A lot of times those strict constructionist judges like Clarence Thomas have called out people like Sonia Sotomayor and accused her of essentially doing judicial activism, meaning like making decisions because of a concern of the effect or impact of a law may be detrimental to some people. And they say that's not your job. It's only as to the people in front of you. However, as we've seen as recent as this week when the Supreme Court allowed the state of Alabama to redraw their districts in order to carve out and eliminate majority black districts, in keeping perhaps with their decision in Louisiana v. Calais to say that gerrymandering on racial lines was improper. They said that it was too short a time to switch back the Texas redistricting that was impermissibly or just done on behalf of the Texas people by the legislature. They said, we can't change what the legislature do. It's too close to the election. That's what they said last year about Texas. It's June. No, it's May. It's May. And they just allowed Alabama to adjust their maps. Hypocrisy? Yes, definitely. Activism, yes. And we've seen it before. In Dobbs, they overturned Roe v. Wade. However, a month later or so, in another case involving balloting and what's to be on the ballot, they decide, no, we can't let the states control. We must be standard because we need a standard way of these ballots. It has to be federal. It has to be the federal control, not the state. And here we are, an opportunity for them to be hypocritical again, because the state of Virginia, on an emergency basis, asked the Supreme Court to review the interpretation of the term election day. And they haven't agreed to take the case yet. However, they've already agreed to take the case in Mississippi when some conservatives are trying to change what the definition is of election day in order to limit the count from people who turn in their ballots, postmarked by election day. The law in Mississippi said it'll still be counted. So, the Republicans and conservatives are all about limiting people's votes and democracy, reining it in. So conservative groups don't want votes counted that are received after the election day, but postmarked by the election day. They believe it must be received by election day. So the Supreme Court has already agreed to review the Mississippi case. Georgia asked them, since you're already interpreting election day, won't you take up our case? They have yet to accept the Virginia request. Why is that? When they quickly accepted the Mississippi's request. That's judicial activism. That is what it means to be an activist judge. It means to be an activist judge when you say that the judges must not intervene with the executive priorities and executive policies. And so when a federal district court judge issues a nationwide injunction or issues a temporary injunction to block the Trump administration, it's you, Supreme Court, conservatives on an emergency basis going to and lifting the block and saying, no, you judges, let the executive priority continue. However, when Joe Biden tried to use his executive priority to forgive loans, you, Supreme Court, jumped in and said, no, you can't forgive loans because those loans that program is under the purview of the Congress. So your job is just to be executive. Congress has their role. We're going to wait and not let you relieve the thousands, maybe millions of Americans that need loan relief. And we're going to constrain you to the executive. And that's not what they did with Donald Trump. When Barack Obama wanted to make some EPA rules, they said, no, the EPA, that's Congress. You can't change the EPA rules. That's a congressional thing. Even though the EPA and environmental is a policy objective and a policy priorities for Democrats. So when it's a Democrat policy priority, the Supreme Court's not willing to let the priorities of the president go through. But when it's a conservative, like a Republican, like Donald Trump, you want the judges to yield and give deference to a Republican president. That's hypocrisy. That's judicial activism. Judicial activism is saying that you cannot let race matter. Race doesn't matter. We have to be a colorblind society when it comes to affirmative action, when it comes to gerrymandering. But when it comes to arresting Black, brown, Latino people in California, then okay, you can use race. That can be a factor. This is why y'all are not beating up charges of people saying that you are racist, that you are legislating from the bench, that you are abandoning your, so you say, principles of like strict constructionism or judicial restraint or originalistic or whatever it is that you want to call yourself. You're not doing that. You're being actively partisan, hack-like, and you're not beating the charges. But anyway, I hope that was helpful for you. So the TLDR is that judicial activism, being an activist judge, means that you make decisions from the bench in consideration of what's going on outside just the parties in front of you. And you're looking at the impact of your decision on, for example, the ability of Black people to be able to vote in all states, because the impact of Louisiana, Calais has been felt on multiple states. Now, here's what I feel, and I feel it with my heart of hearts. I think all of this is going to backfire royally on these people. I think that's what's going to happen is they've activated a sleeping giant. I feel like people are going to rally, and people who normally would not vote are going to learn that when you try to take something away from people, people activate. Listen here. The states that have the most Black people in the United States includes these states that are doing this. Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama. A lot of those folks do not necessarily vote because they're like disinfected. They don't think voting counts. This is a wonderful opportunity for people to activate those Black voters. 30% in Louisiana, for example. It's like 26% in Mississippi. If every single Black person in those states who were eligible actually voted, that would be the end of the Republican hold, because it's like it would be the end of the red state, because it would be purple, there would be pink. That's their fear. They're doing all this because they fear people. The commoditization, and it's so funny. So people try to say like, you guys aren't that important. You guys think you're more important. Yes, because every single thing in this United States, they've constantly legislated. Like even when the Black people minding their business and say, okay, fine, we're not going to have any rights. That's fine. We're going to be over here minding ourselves in our self-sustained communities. White people have gone on and just leave their place and come and burn down these towns, and they've done it from the beginning. Their colonial ancestors left their homes in Europe to go rape, pillage, and put dominion over the rest of the world. Carve them up and say, you belong to us now. Subjugate them to us, divide up tribes, put people together, just manipulate folks instead of minding your business, stealing their artifacts, and then they have the nerve to tell their descendants that we are the criminals. We're the ones that are rapists. We're the ones that are pillagers. We're the ones that are thieves. Anyway, it sounds really militant, but everyone's becoming militant. Everyone's becoming woke these days. Each one teach one. Let's talk below. But now you know. Any questions, I'll answer.